In this episode, we're going to take what an organization says it needs from security and turn that into an actual operating plan that a Security Operations Center, SOC, can deliver. A lot of beginners can understand the goals at a high level, like detect threats faster or respond better, but struggle with the next step, which is defining what the SOC will do every day. Operational requirements are the bridge between broad intent and practical execution because they describe the outcomes, time expectations, and quality expectations that must be met. When you translate requirements into services, you make the SOC real because services describe the work the team performs and the results the organization can rely on. From there, you can build coverage models that explain when and how monitoring happens and staffing plans that explain who is needed to keep everything running without burnout. By the end, you should be able to explain this translation process as a series of clear decisions rather than guesswork. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Operational requirements are specific statements about what must happen for security operations to be considered effective in your environment. They usually include detection needs, response expectations, reporting obligations, and evidence needs, and they often include time constraints that define urgency. Some requirements come from compliance rules, some come from internal leadership, and some come from the reality of business operations that cannot tolerate long outages. Time constraints often appear as targets like how quickly alerts should be reviewed or how quickly a confirmed incident must be escalated, and those targets shape how the SOC is built. Quality expectations also matter, such as whether investigations must be documented in a consistent way or whether response actions must be approved through a defined authority chain. When you assess requirements carefully, you can separate what is mandatory from what is aspirational, which helps you design a program that is achievable. This is the first step in preventing the SOC from becoming an overpromised service that cannot deliver. A SOC service is a defined capability the team provides, with a clear purpose and a clear expectation of outcomes. A service should be understandable to both technical staff and leadership because it describes what the organization gets in exchange for investment. For example, a detection service is not just having tools. It is the capability to notice suspicious activity in a defined scope and handle it in a consistent way. An incident coordination service is the capability to lead or manage the response process so the right people act in the right order with minimal confusion. A reporting service is the capability to provide visibility into trends, outcomes, and risk conditions, so decisions can be made with evidence rather than intuition. Services create accountability because they define what the SOC owns, and they also protect the team because they define what the SOC does not own. When you translate requirements into services, you are turning vague expectations into commitments that can be staffed and measured. Once services are defined, you need a coverage model, which is the plan for when monitoring and response capability are available and how quickly actions occur. Coverage is often misunderstood as simply being open or closed, but in reality it includes depth and responsiveness, not just hours. For example, one model might provide continuous alert monitoring, but only provide full investigation depth during business hours, while another model might provide full investigative capability around the clock. The right choice depends on operational requirements, especially time expectations for critical events, and it must match the organization's risk tolerance. If leadership expects certain incidents to be handled quickly at any time, then coverage must support that expectation. If the environment has predictable business cycles and less after-hours risk, coverage can be designed to focus effort where it matters most. A defensible model makes these trade-offs explicit so the organization understands what it is buying. Coverage also has a quality dimension that beginners sometimes overlook, which is how much context and expertise is present at different times. A SOC can claim to have coverage at night, but if the only available action is acknowledging an alert without being able to investigate, the real capability is limited. Some organizations use a tiered approach where initial triage is available more widely. while deeper analysis is concentrated in fewer hours or fewer staff, and that can be effective if escalation processes are clear. The key is that requirements must drive the design, meaning you choose the coverage that meets time and quality expectations for the most important services. This is where concepts like Service Level Agreement, SLA, appear, because an SLA expresses response targets that the SOC is expected to meet. Even when a formal SLA is not written, the expectation still exists, and you must design coverage to match it. A mismatch between expectations and coverage is one of the most common reasons a SOC is seen as failing. To translate requirements into staffing, you start with the workload created by the services and the coverage model. Workload includes the volume of alerts, the time it takes to triage and investigate, the time it takes to coordinate response, and the time spent on maintenance tasks like tuning detections and producing reports. Beginners often imagine staffing as simply filling seats for coverage hours, but staffing must include capacity for quality work, training, and improvement, not just presence. If you staff only enough to watch alerts, you will have no time to reduce noise, improve detection quality, or refine response processes, and the program will slowly degrade. A sustainable staffing plan includes time for continuous improvement because threats change, systems change, and lessons learned must be applied. Staffing also must account for human limits, because fatigue and constant pressure reduce accuracy and increase mistakes. A defensible plan treats people as a critical resource that must be protected, not consumed. Another important staffing idea is role clarity, because services require different kinds of work and different levels of judgment. Some tasks are repeatable and procedural, such as initial classification of common alerts, while other tasks require deeper reasoning, such as correlating evidence across systems or advising leadership on containment trade-offs. If everyone is expected to do everything equally, training becomes harder and performance becomes inconsistent. A good plan defines which kinds of work happen at which skill levels and ensures there is a clear path for escalation. This does not mean creating rigid job titles in your head. It means recognizing that a SOC needs both reliable first response and strong investigative depth. It also means recognizing that someone must own the health of the detection pipeline, because alerts do not improve on their own. When you align roles with services, you create a team structure that supports consistent outcomes. That alignment is one of the clearest ways to turn requirements into daily operations. Operational requirements also shape how you prioritize work inside the SOC, because not every alert deserves the same time investment. Prioritization should be driven by business impact, asset criticality, and confidence, and those factors should be defined in advance so decisions are consistent. If your requirements emphasize protecting critical services, then alerts tied to those services should be triaged faster and investigated more deeply. If your requirements emphasize compliance evidence, then certain events must be documented carefully even if they do not feel exciting. This is where service definitions help, because they clarify what outcomes matter most and what evidence is required to prove those outcomes. Prioritization also helps staffing because it determines what must be handled immediately and what can be handled in a scheduled queue. Without clear prioritization, staffing needs balloon because the team tries to treat everything as urgent. A disciplined approach keeps the workload manageable and the response quality higher. A coverage model must also consider escalation and handoffs, because incidents and investigations do not always fit neatly into shift boundaries. If work is handed off poorly, time is wasted repeating steps and important context gets lost, which increases risk and delays response. Operational requirements often imply that certain events must be tracked from detection through closure, and that requires good continuity. Continuity comes from consistent documentation, clear status tracking, and shared understanding of what has been validated and what remains uncertain. Even in a beginner-friendly view, you can see why this matters, because an attacker does not pause their activity just because a shift changes. A defensible SOC design plans for handoffs as part of coverage, not as an afterthought. That planning reduces the chance of missed signals and increases confidence that the program is reliable. Reliability is what leadership is really buying when they invest in security operations. Turning requirements into services also means deciding what data and visibility each service depends on, because you cannot deliver a detection service without logs, and you cannot deliver incident coordination without evidence and communication paths. If requirements demand fast detection but the environment lacks consistent logging, the right first step may be building visibility rather than promising immediate detection outcomes. This is where managers must be honest about prerequisites, because services should be built on a stable foundation. Operational fit matters here, because some environments can support deep monitoring quickly, while others need staged improvements. The key is to define services with assumptions, such as which systems are in scope and which telemetry is required, so success is measurable. When those assumptions are not met, the SOC can point to the gap and drive improvement rather than being blamed for missing data it never had. This is how requirements become a roadmap instead of a wish list. Staffing decisions must also consider training and consistency, because a SOC that constantly rotates inexperienced staff without support will struggle to meet quality requirements. Training is part of operations, not a separate luxury, because the threat landscape and the environment will keep changing. A plan should include time for learning common patterns, practicing investigation logic, and understanding the organization's critical services and normal behavior. Consistency also matters because inconsistent triage leads to inconsistent outcomes, which makes metrics meaningless and undermines trust. A practical approach is to build playbook-like habits without turning everything into rigid scripts, meaning the team has standard decision checkpoints but still uses judgment. This balance helps beginners understand that operations can be structured and human at the same time. When training and consistency are built into staffing, performance improves and burnout decreases because people know what good looks like and how to reach it. That is a management quality decision that shows up in long-term results. Another requirement-driven factor is the need for resilience during spikes, because incidents and major alert storms do not arrive politely at a steady pace. A SOC design that works only during calm periods is not truly operational, because real security work includes sudden surges triggered by outages, new vulnerabilities, or active attacks. If requirements include rapid response to high-severity events, staffing must include surge capacity, whether through on-call arrangements, cross-trained staff, or defined escalation to other teams. The goal is not to overstaff permanently for rare spikes, but to plan for how spikes will be handled without collapsing normal operations. This is where service boundaries help again, because during a spike you may temporarily pause non-critical services like routine reporting to focus on incident handling. A defensible plan makes these priorities explicit so leadership understands what will shift under pressure. When the plan is explicit, the organization experiences a controlled response instead of confusion and blame. Measurements tie this whole translation together because services, coverage, and staffing must be validated against requirements. If a requirement says critical alerts must be reviewed quickly, then you measure that timing and use the results to adjust coverage or staffing. If a requirement says investigations must be documented, then you measure documentation completeness and consistency, not just raw alert counts. Metrics should be used to improve decisions, not to punish people, because punishment hides problems rather than solving them. A good operational mindset uses metrics to find bottlenecks, such as too many low-quality alerts consuming time, or not enough visibility into key systems, or escalation paths that are slow. When you translate requirements into services, you should also translate them into measurable outcomes, because what cannot be measured cannot be managed well. This is especially important for a manager-focused certification, because exam questions often reward decisions that are evidence-driven and sustainable. It is also worth reinforcing a common misconception. Staffing more people is not always the best first answer if the operational requirement problem is actually a quality problem in the alert pipeline. If the SOC is overwhelmed by noise, adding people can help temporarily, but the program will remain inefficient until alert quality improves and priorities are clarified. Requirements translation should include improving inputs, such as refining detections, reducing false positives, and ensuring alerts contain enough context to support fast triage. This is a design choice, not just a technical tweak, because it affects how people spend their time and how quickly decisions can be made. When you connect the idea of services to the quality of the data and alerts that feed those services, you begin to see why operations is a system. A well-designed system protects attention because attention is a limited resource and is often the first thing to fail during an incident. Protecting attention is a defensible management objective. By bringing operational requirements down into concrete services, realistic coverage models, and sustainable staffing, you turn a SOC from an idea into an operation that can be trusted. Requirements tell you what outcomes and timelines are expected. Services describe what the SOC delivers. Coverage explains when and how those services are available, and staffing provides the human capacity to make it all real. The best designs make trade-offs explicit, because explicit trade-offs are defensible, while hidden trade-offs turn into surprises and disappointment. When you learn to think this way, you can evaluate any SOC proposal by asking whether it truly matches the organization's goals and whether it can be operated without constant crisis. That is the mindset the exam is aiming to measure. Because security operations management is not about wishing for perfect security, it is about building dependable capability under real constraints. Carry this translation approach forward, and the rest of SOC design topics will feel like logical extensions rather than disconnected details.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.